Welcome back. Is the state of Florida playing games with Sarasota's efforts to replace old, dilapidated public housing by designating it a historic landmark? Hey, who isn't for preserving history, right? But when it's a monument to segregation in Sarasota, the first public housing in Sarasota built specifically for the African American community in 1942, when the Florida Department of State writes, quote, the 13 original buildings appear to retain a high degree of character and integrity, the obvious question has to be, has anyone been to Newtown Heights? Here's another question. Is it a pretext to stop the city from using federal money to build a new modern public housing project? And joining us for more are Whitney Douglas, a resident of Newtown Heights, Dave Morgan, the vice chair of the Sarasota Housing Authority, and Susan Nylon, who helped bring this situation to light. And Susan, we got to thank you for this, because this is absolutely incredible. I mean, I can't understand what they're talking about, that the 13 original buildings appear to retain a high degree of historic character and integrity. I think keeping people in unair-conditioned apartment that you cannot do renovations that have, in some cases, mold is anything in terms of integrity, Dave. You folks seem to be knocking your heads against the wall in terms of moving this project along.
Yeah, the State Housing Preservation Office, they've now been the roadblock. So we have one piece of the state that is giving us funds, and then we have one office that basically has said, we find that this is historic. And every time that we can document or show them that it's not, they give us something else to do. And so we were just running into roadblocks.
Let's be clear about something. Sure. In the 1940s, when this project was built, this was built for the African American community in the Newtown area. There were other public housing projects for the white community in other areas.
So you got to remember in the 40s, there would be a white development, and in the 40s they would say this is Negro housing. That's actually what they would call it.
So what happened to the historic buildings that made up the white public housing?
Torn down.
And improved upon.
And improved upon. So a lot of the housing from the 80s, it's been torn down, or they're being torn down. So you know, this is a relic of segregation, and we're trying to get rid of that.
Whitney, you saw some of your neighbors there basically make their case. How difficult is it to live in these apartments, especially this time of year when it's really starting to heat up? There are basically jerry-rigged air conditioning units that have been changed over the years. You used to have actually window units. Right. What happened with those?
They did away with them. They said it was a fire hazard and gave us the portable ones that have the holes that go into the window. They work, but we don't have one for every room.
And that's just part of the problem. As I mentioned, there are problems with mold and other things that describe it for us.
Well, there's mold in the bathrooms, and I try to keep it down by spraying it with bleach and mold cleaner. You know, it's real hot in there, and then it gets, however it feels outside, that's how it's going to feel in the inside. So like in the wintertime, it's cold in the inside because we don't have the heaters either. So it's like you're outside.
Alan, you got to realize too, the walls are so thick, and the way they're made, you can't even change out the window to modernize the window. You can't put better insulated equipment into that just to improve upon the facility itself, just because of the way it's made.
How did you find out about this?
You know, I got a tip, I started digging into it, and I uncovered it, and I at first when I read the letter, I was like, okay, well this sounds absolutely fine, because I'm big on historic preservation, until I did a little check of the buildings, and then I remembered what these buildings were, and so I just decided I had to do a little bit more digging.
I guess the question is, why has it taken so long for this to really, you know, become a public issue? I mean, we have not heard about this before.
You know, and I'm curious myself, because I've been around Sarasota for over 40 years, and this is the first time I've heard this, but...
So we have been applying for funding for well over a decade, and, you know, the funds that we got, there are these 9% tax credits, and they're very competitive, and so we can apply every year, and we finally secured the funding for it.
Okay, we are just getting warmed up, and we'll have much more on Newtown Public Housing right after we check the first alert weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about the state of Florida's efforts to protect an old, dilapidated housing project in Newtown by designating it an historic landmark. Joining us for more are Whitney Douglas, a resident of Newtown Heights, Dave Morgan, the vice chair of the Sarasota Housing Authority, and Susan Nylon, who helped bring this situation to light. And David, I want to get back to something that was in the Department of State's letter, saying that the 13 original buildings appear to retain a high degree of historic character and integrity. You work with HUD. You travel the U.S. looking at public housing projects.
Yep.
Is there any difference between this one and others that you see around the same age around the country?
No, it seemed like one architect had made the design, and they just kept replicating it over and over again all across the United
So
States.
there is nothing unique.
It's just old. It's just one of the older ones, is what I'm guessing. But
So let's cut to the chase here.
Sure.
Is somebody playing a game here?
you know, I can't figure out. I cannot figure out for the life of me why Timothy Parsons has decided to kind of keep putting us through these hoops, and there's nothing historical about this. There's nothing that we want to preserve about this, and you know, this is our last roadblock in this in our redevelopment efforts.
You know, and we should point out, we did reach out to Timothy Parsons and the Florida Department on State to take part in this broadcast and to also talk to Dwayne when he put together the story. They provided a statement, but nothing more than that. You know, Whitney, as somebody who has lived there for several years, I would imagine that there is, you know, growing frustration amongst you and your neighbors in terms of, you know, the federal funds have been assigned. The city wants to do something about it, and this office within the Department of State seems to be putting, as Dave says, a lot of roadblocks up.
Right, and it's going to be kind of hectic if we don't get to move right now, because school will be starting back, and I have 3 kids, one in high school, one in middle school, and one in elementary school, and I'll also be starting school in September, nursing school, so I wish they hurry up. Get it done now.
You're
so.
trying to do the right thing. You're going
Right.
to nursing school, your kids are getting an education,
Right.
you want a better life for them, but because of whatever circumstances, you're trapped in a dilapidated public housing project
Exactly.
that your community has the money to replace, and
And the
for some
will.
reason, and the will, and for some reason the state is an impediment.
Right, it's going to be hectic trying to move and do all that if they don't hurry up and get it done.
I just want to say, because you mentioned earlier the letter, the problem is the words on the page mean nothing to that individual. He has no connection or any interest in actually finding out what he's deemed historic. I can't imagine anyone who would actually come to this property and say, yes, this is something not only that we need to preserve it, but we need to insist that people live in. And if it was really truly historic preservation, you want to save a single building to mark that point in time, then do that. But don't insist that people live in it just because you want to hold on to a piece of history that, frankly, we should all, you know,
Right, and by the
recognize.
same token, if Dave, if you are saying that the public housing projects of, you know, similar design in Sarasota meant for the white community, built around the same time, have long been torn down, then, you know, how much weight
And
can
it's
this
not just
argument
even in
have?
Sarasota. I mean, this is across the United States. Is, you know, we're seeing these 80-year-old buildings. They're old. I mean, they're old and they're worn out, and it's from, you know, 80 years ago, and it's time to go.
All right, so let's talk about who is doing what about this. Susan, you are also with the ACLU. The ACLU is getting involved.
Well, we have a local meeting tomorrow that we're going to talk about it and take a look at this, because I'm personally concerned about the civil rights that are involved in this, the selection of the fact that this particular property, for really no significant reason, is being kept and people are forced to live in it. There's a lot of concern.
And Dave, you say that you've talked to the NAACP.
So our housing authority had reached out, and they gave us some verbal support today, and they're going to take a more in-depth look at what's going on. We've had the community, really anybody in Sarasota that's seen what we're doing, we have not had any pushback. And actually everybody's been extremely supportive.
Whitney, what have you and other residents done? Have you tried to organize and try to bring attention to what this situation is, or do you kind of feel like you're caught as a, basically a player in somebody else's decision making?
Well, there's not much we can do. We just, go by what they tell us. I don't know. We put complaints in and go to the office and, put in the work orders for stuff that's, breaking down all the time and stuff. But other than that, I don't think it's much we can do.
Right. So this project, or a new project, is over 70% federal money, but there is also state money involved here. So the obvious questions would be, have you contacted your Congressman Vern Buchanan about this? Have you contacted state legislators who would hold sway over the Department of State?
And that's one of the things that we're going to have to start doing, is now getting our politicians involved and give them something to do and really kind of help us with this issue, because it's one state office, and one state office is giving us money, the Housing Finance Corporation, and then the office, they call it SHPA, but the Housing or Historic Preservation Office is holding us back.
Susan, you've been an active member of this community for many years. Have you ever seen anything quite like this?
I haven't, actually. I mean, I've seen people get behind historical buildings. I myself have supported quite a few of them of preserving them. However, they were never buildings that people were forced to live in. They were never dilapidated buildings, and we always measured the money that we could raise to restore a single building to represent it.
And one of the things, what they're trying to apply is, so in Birmingham, when the civil rights were getting started in the Birmingham, Alabama, they're trying to apply the same historic significance to Sarasota as their Birmingham, Alabama.
And it just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense to us.
We don't have this historical ties to that piece of the history.
So, Whitney, I'm going to give you an opportunity here. If there's anything you wanted to say to this Timothy Parsons, the Director of the Division of Historic Resources at the Department of State, on behalf of yourself, your family, and your neighbors, what would that be?
Tear them down, please, hurry up, and so we can get out of there. People who don't want to stay there shouldn't have to be forced to live there. I don't want to be there anymore. I'm glad I've had the opportunity to be in one, but it's time to go.
Okay, we'll have to leave our conversation right there. We have to take a break. We have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in just a moment. And our guests join us right now for final thoughts. So, Susan, what do you want people to walk away with in terms of watching this? Because a lot of people watch this broadcast and they like to weigh in on their opinions about public housing and whatever. What would you like them to know?
Well, I would like them to know that it's one thing to preserve our history. It's another thing to hold on to something that doesn't have that value. Not to let it go. Not to just assume that because this doesn't touch their lives that this isn't important. And I also think I'd like to invite Mr. Parsons to actually come and spend a couple of days at this property. Maybe spend the night in here in the middle of August and find out what it's like to be enclosed in a property that you just can't breathe at night because there's no air circulation going on.
You mentioned Timothy Parsons here. We're going to put his telephone number up on the screen, and if you folks feel like you would like to, you might want to give him a call. Timothy Parsons, the Director of Division of Historical Resources. His telephone number is 850-245-6344. Again, Timothy Parsons with the Division of Historical Resources, 850-245-6344. And I would imagine that, Dave, if you talk to him tomorrow, he would say, "Thanks a lot, Dave."
And I would say, "You're welcome."
Do your job.
Do your job. And, at the Housing Authority, we want to provide quality housing, safe housing, and, we want to give what's best for our residents and the best opportunities.
Answer your own statement there. Is this safe? This housing at this point safe, and is it quality?
In my opinion, we need to tear it down, and we want to get we want to get it torn down. We want to get it redeveloped. We want to get something new and modern in there, and we want to make sure people can get their vouchers and they can go find.
And I was quick to say, these families, they can move right away as soon as they get permission. They don't even have to wait until the building gets torn down in order for them to move to a better place.
Right.
He just has to sign off on it. That's it.
And so, Whitney, what would you like people to walk away with this conversation from?
Call Dave Parsons. The number is on the screen, and please call him and harass him.
All right, I think
In a nice way.
we'll
Yes.
leave it there. Thank you all. FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And for the latest on local breaking news, don't forget to download the updated version of our app. If your current app doesn't work, it's expired, just go to the App Store and re-download it by searching for WWSB or My Suncoast. We want to thank our guests for being here tonight. Whitney Douglas is a resident of Newtown Heights. Dave Morgan is the vice chair of the Sarasota Housing Authority, and Susan Nylon helped bring this situation to light.